Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today, we've got the last list of the year, the top 25 best albums of 2019. For once, this list came together pretty quickly. Now, I've often said that my list of the best albums of any respective year is where I can be the most professional this year more than most, as I actually submitted a top 10 ballot to Uproxx for their annual critic compilation polls nearly a month ago, which has given me plenty more time to mull over my choices. But I'd also argue that 2019, especially after a top-heavy first 6 months, just hasn't had the consistent influx of huge disruptive projects that would demand major changes. Oh, there was definitely a few that had to be slotted in and produce some competition, but it fell out pretty quickly, and while I'd argue there's been a lot of fantastic albums this year, I'd also say I was wowed a little bit less, which meant that I didn't have to agonize nearly as much over these picks. Now, one thing I will note, though, is how my list differs considerably from other critics, both on YouTube and in the mainstream publications, partially because many of the albums that I personally adore just didn't receive a lot of attention or were ignored outright, but also because I was significantly less impressed by many of the acts that did get a lot of acclaim. It became a meme in my comments section. So if you're looking for Igor or Norman fucking Rockwell or Titanic Rising or All Mirrors or even Magdalene, yeah, they're not making the list. Go check out the reviews to explain why. Also, I want to push back on the narrative that this year wasn't great for music, which I've seen among some hip-hop heads especially, who just didn't want to put in the work to step outside the mainstream, and that I could not disagree with stronger, because the underground hip-hop scene did extremely well this year, as did punk and its various offshoots, and especially the indie country scene, where the women cleaned up in a way they haven't since 2016. Now, of course, that also means there were some cuts here, but few that really frustrated me. I had my reasons. And surprise, surprise, a lot of cuts came either in hip-hop, with A$AP Rock, Yugen Black Rock, Lil Sims, and Freddie Gibbs just falling short, or in country, where Randy Houser, Mike and the Moonpies, Sturgill Simpson, and even Alice Wallace didn't make it. But outside of that, few scattered indie projects like Black Midi, Laura Imbruglia, and The National, and metal albums like Paths of Rorschach, Tomb Mold, and Spirit Adrift, they were close but didn't quite seal the deal. I mean, consider them the unofficial honorable mentions or something, because now it's time we get to the list proper, starting off with number 25. So there are a couple of late career projects that are on this list, and of those, this is the one that surprised me and stuck with me the most. But again, given how formative a lot of her work has been for me growing up, it shouldn't be any surprise.
And there's no whiskey stronger than the truth.
Then again, it might be surprising simply because Reba McEntire had no obligation to make a neo-traditional country album this consistent and potent at this stage of her career. She's in her mid-60s, and not only is this her best album in decades, it had the candor and the lyrical heft to go toe-to-toe with any competition, expertly balancing some neo-traditional warmth with the easy listening side that she's always cultivated, along with a few pretty solid honky-tonk cuts. There's only really one serious dud on the album, that being Freedom, and even that's not enough to detract from the expert pacing, the writing that is not afraid to cut really deep, and vocals that have felt the weight of age, but still have the expressive clarity of tone that's always been Reba's hallmark, and she can still belt pretty effectively. It's just unbelievably solid, heartfelt country that if Nashville had any courage at all, would have given a lot of prime radio placement. And well, it didn't happen, still a special gem, deserves real attention. Check this out. Number 24. This is the first time an album from this artist is making my year-end list, and while for certain die-hard fans I can understand why he probably should have been here sooner, when he delivered his most personal and tightly framed project to date, it was only a matter of time before Billy Woods got the acclaim he deserved.
SpongeBob, the whole operation underwater. It's only one God, what we said and tore aboard. The bombs was on us, the bombs was on us.
I've often described Billy Woods as a difficult rapper to fully appreciate. His writing's more abstract or even impressionistic at spots, using tangled layers of metaphor that doesn't quite connect, that's expected to feel easier given his blunt delivery, and yet never quite is. until now. And that's something I respect tremendously about Hiding Places. Kenny Segal still crafts the thorny, creaking, lo-fi production that shambles through paranoia and fractured samples, but the framing is a lot tighter around Woods. And while previous projects with Arm & Hammer have emphasized his plans to survive the coming societal breakdown or even an apocalypse, this is the album that forces him to confront how much skin in the game he really has, and that there's a part of him that still genuinely cares. This is a project that probably gives you the most insight into Billy Woods' haunted brooding and real anxieties this year, spanning broken systems and fleeting control. And while it's often a tough listen, more often than not for me, it was a necessary one. Of the 2 projects he released this year, definitely check this one out. Number 23. Yeah, I caught this one late, I'll freely admit that, and it's one of the projects I christened with the subgenre Dream Country. Don't know if that's going to catch on properly, but when you consider how much of this project is searching amidst the spare tones and self-reflection, it's a label that's certainly apt, I have to say.
You don't know no one. You don't know no one. You don't know don't hurt you.
So look, I'm not sure if there's an immediate standout on mint condition that matches the absolute best of Carolyn Spence's last project with a song like Softball, although Wait in the Wine is really damn close. But if there is a project that's content to ask those questions and plumb the uncertain depths, it is this one. And that balance of yearning tempered by maturity and too much experience is why the album just works so damn well. It's reserved and elegant in patches, but with enough sweep to emphasize the persistent loneliness. And Carolyn Spence's writing is just direct enough to connect while implying a much greater level of emotive subtext that's often really heartbreaking in the fine details. It's not quite as burnished or sweeping as the best projects in this niche, but the critical acclaim that it's gotten from certain circles, well deserved. A great little slow burn, absolutely worth a lot more attention. Don't be late on this one. Number 22. So I'm not sure that there's that many outwardly controversial entries on this list, especially in comparison with previous years, but if there's an album that might raise a couple eyebrows, especially given the sound and style that these two have embraced, yeah, it's this album, and it's partially the reason it's one of their best to date.
Hey, I'm just like you, a little messed up and blue.
Yeah, I'll admit, the big reason I absolutely adore Hey I'm Just Like You, it's almost too straightforward. It sounds like a mid-2000s pop rock album that would have been released by someone like Brie Larson or Hilary Duff, marrying the synth-backed rock elements with the huge radio-ready pop hooks with the emotional complexity that Tegan and Sara have always brought to the table. More to the point, there's a deeper sense of populism or even humility to how the sisters have updated their teenage poetry for nowadays, showing exactly how resonant those sentiments can be even decades later. Questions of immaturity being more of a feature rather than a bug, and it doesn't make the songs any less relevant. This is a project that's not too good for its lineage, and while it's not quite as brilliantly produced as I was hoping, it is the most I've enjoyed a Tegan and Sara album in years. And you know what? The tunes, they're undeniable. Excellent work. Number 21. This album is both more and less accessible than you would probably expect, especially from this artist. And while I'd argue it's not quite his best, it is the album that grew on me the most in 2019, and for damn good reason.
Before I be in your city, coming to your city, I be in your city, coming to a city near you in your city.
I remember giving Guns a lot of listens before I reviewed it properly months ago, but even beyond that, it took another dozen or so listens before it truly took off with me and clinched its spot here. Most because Quelle Chris is fine-tuning his ability to paint layered pictures that only reveal interweaving connections from a lot of different angles over time. And in a way, it's an expansion upon what he and Jean Grey highlighted on the fragile systems of Everything's Fine. Only this time, he's more intrigued by the often violent tools used to prop them up, and not afraid to show just how complicit everyone can be in that process. It's an album that's just kind of fascinated with those wielding the guns than just the weapons themselves, which sparks a lot of layered metaphors as complicated and challenging as his production and slightly off-kilter delivery can be, but it also may be his most accessible project to date, with pivots into brighter, more accessible melodic tones or a set of smoldering bangers that still really hit. In other words, this is a shot that struck true. Frankly, I'm just curious what's in the chamber next. Number 20. But while we're on the topic of socially charged and really difficult hip-hop albums,
Drink it up, drink it up.
They're existing and addicted.
Drink it up, drink it up. Drink it up, drink it up.
From direct gangsta satire to a space opera to a collection of some of the most visceral slices of horror-adjacent imagery, it might seem on the surface that clipping is just tearing through genre exercises with socially conscious subtext that's coiling around a lot of the experimental production, featuring a command of atmosphere that's damn near unparalleled. But at their core, clipping has always centered hip-hop and the audience's relationship to it. And between some of their most ruthlessly challenging sonic experiments and content that demands that you consider your own relationship to this art, even as they accept the punishment for nakedly feeding into these exploitative systems, you got an album that's gonna flay apart established norms while it burns itself alive, and it dares you to watch. Which is why when I say this is art house exploitation in the same vein as the punishing films of the same vein that I love from the 70s, I mean that as a compliment. It's not an easy album, to be sure, but an incredibly rich one and underrated one all the same. Number 19. But again, while we're on the topic of projects that aren't anywhere close to being easy, every critic I know who has covered this album has said that it's difficult to discuss and even harder to listen through. A project that explores in unflinching detail a woman who has suffered an abusive relationship, and where her response is an appropriation of righteous Catholic fury that's nothing short of biblical in its structure and delivery. Chamber music and the chord progressions ripped asunder by ways of distortion and noise and even metal at points. Incarnate beauty with a banshee's wail, and yet written in a way that's real enough to make you realize the artifice is just an amplification of genuine pain, not embracing theatricality. So no, far from easy, and I don't know if I had the year I did, this project would have even made my list, but I did have that year, and this wound up on repeat. Oh God help me. Number 18. Okay, let's move towards something a little less heavy. Well, okay, deceptively less heavy, because there's still a lot going on here that still gets to me. You know what, just roll it.
Lady of the night, are you more lonesome with them gone or by your side?
This was the other late-year dream country surprise for me, and while I'd say that Carolyn Spence's project contains more lyrical nuance and a fair bit more maturity, Michaela Ann has the burnished texture, the fantastic hooks, and a purity of intention that really grabbed me emotionally. I don't think naivete is the right word, because that implies a lack of self-awareness, which with more listens I'm definitely sure she has, but the best drama comes in her bowling right past that and taking those emotional risks to chase love and loss. And when you pair it all with the lonely, sweeping atmospherics, a great observational eye for detail, and Michaela Ann's sweet and remarkably charming delivery, there is a yearning balance that even among the harder or darker moments on this project does have a ray of light. Another project that did not see nearly enough attention, even in indie country, and that I was way too late discussing, but don't make the mistake. Make the time, check this out. Number 17. And while we're on the list of projects that I should have been more on top of discussing in 2019, or at least should have aimed to say a lot more,
Nobody move, nobody gets hurt. It's time to do work. Tell them, just give me what I came for. If you got it out the mud, you ain't scared of the dirt. Tell them, just give me what I came for.
So I said in my abbreviated review that I wasn't sure that this Little Brother album was better than Fonte's solo project from last year that also made my list. Yeah, I was dead wrong, because not only is Little Brother's comeback full of the easy wit, incredible charm, and grounded maturity that made their best work so striking, along with so many infectious grooves that made this album so easy to revisit, there's also an incredible depth and thematic sophistication of this album that might be ignored amidst all the callbacks to The Listening and The Minstrel Show, especially as the commodification of that fan service, it only accentuates the thematic core of the album. So many little inside jokes, so many incredibly pointed comments exploring the relationship of older black men with hip-hop culture and the industry, both from inside and outside of it, and by its end, a surprising amount of real emotive weight that feels earned. Yes, I know it's me getting into my grown man, borderline middle-aged hip-hop bag, but you know what? This was slept on by entirely too many. Check it out. Number 16. I don't know what I can say about this EP that I haven't already mentioned several times over, both in my mid-year list and my favorite songs of 2019, but yeah, I needed this one.
And yeah, I should have known better, but I swear it was better before.
Jetty Bones' Hyphen EP is transitional, but that's the point. An extended note of recovery through mid-2000s pop rock with a distinctive emo streak delivered with a sort of naturalistic theatricality that only accentuates the sadness of its storytelling that you don't expect it coming from this sound. It's the sort of project that on the surface you'd be inclined to take lightly until you dig into the lyrics and realize just how deeply it's cutting. It's a similar approach to genre that Tegan and Sara took, but the stakes are a lot higher, and as a whole it's a much tighter experience. And to think that I found it by accident randomly browsing Bandcamp one day. But in any case, I don't know where Jetty Bones is going to take this going forward, but this snapshot meant so much to me in 2019. Hope you all appreciate it. Number 15. And here comes the absolute least surprising entry on any of my list, but when it's this powerful, I don't see anyone complaining.
But only the lonely survive.
At this point, even though Marianas Trench is making pop rock, I don't see how you can look at whatever's left of the genre, both from their past peers and even today, and see much in the way of competition, and that's with them proving they can make pop music that can fill the radio that's even outside of Canada. And while the constant qualifier is, it's not better than Astoria, which is fair to say given how the project feels like an extended coda to that album both thematically and musically, while Astoria is also one of the best albums of the 2010s, I'm not going to hold that much against them. Coupled with one of the best singers working today in Josh Ramsey, the insanely catchy hooks, and the sort of ambition to make pop music this gothic, this huge. Yeah, you know what? I'm fine with this sort of haunting. I only hope it extends into the 2020s. This is special. Number 14. But on the topic of Canadian bands that deserve a lot more attention and obvious acclaim, yes, I know, I was late to getting on board with pop, but I am here now and I'm thrilled to see one of the most fresh pop-punk bands break out of the fertile Toronto scene. Yeah, just you guys wait. There is more that's coming of like them. I've seen it, I've heard it, I can bet on it. But what I love about pop is that they took all those wild, ramshackle, borderline hardcore and post-hardcore instincts of their previous project and married it to a pop sensibility that feels organic and entirely unforced. I will say it ends a little bit darker than I personally prefer, where sometimes the morbid sensibilities didn't quite click at the core, and hell, I was a willing audience for that sort of thing this year, so it's worth pointing out. But with Morbid Stuff, pop found the desperate spurt of energy and the vibrancy to keep on charging forth regardless, and they're finally starting to get rewarded for it. Again, you should hear more from these guys pretty soon. I'd count on that. Number 13. I think this is a tough project to discuss, especially in comparison with this act's last two albums, which handily made my list and I hold among the best of the 2010s. This is not that, and it feels like the final part of a trilogy that can't quite pay off what was started. That is, until I just climb back into it.
Ghosteen dances in my head.
Of Nick Cave's albums this decade, Ghosteen has been the most difficult for me to process. Certainly his most atmospheric, but also his most diffuse. It runs long, it requires a lot of thoughtful listening, and it's not a project that I will throw on that often. But when I do, man, between Nick Cave's heartbroken delivery, the beautifully organic cushion of textures and atmosphere, and some absolutely stunning poetry in processing his loss amidst the grand scope of time's passage, with writing that feels as huge and portentous as the mix, it is a project that draws you through one of the most strikingly painted and heartbroken worlds you will hear this year. The word I've consistently used to describe Ghosteen is fey, which when you compare with what you would expect from Nick Cave, it shouldn't work at all. But the emotional core is so resonant, and the album knows when to pivot back and focus on the fleeting connections on Earth that can be cherished and saved for now. It all fits together. If there's a lot of nightmarish content that's already on this list, this is an album for dreams, and real beautiful ones indeed. Number 12. I'll be very blunt with this. If there are albums that convince me I need to hear more of an entire genre that I haven't previously liked and still wind up as a thematically dense and visceral experience, it makes my list.
I felt afraid and ashamed. I felt anything at all. I felt you panicking, your shattering, your catastrophic fall.
It seems like there's among some groups that this album took a while to really grow on folks, and I've seen and heard more acclaim for it as the years progressed, and for damn good reason, because La Dispute dropped another phenomenal and challenging album that may have convinced me I might actually like post-hardcore, or at least like this, but Panorama stuck with me more deeply than even that, mostly because the writing is absolutely top-notch in exploring how to provide emotional support for somebody who's suffering depression or trauma when you feel like you're the last person who should, with the slow-burning, stormy tension only amplified by how much the album will accentuate that negative space. Nick Cave might have used it to show the vastness of time and space. La Dispute is using it to show how that vastness can make a loving relationship an emotional hell. It's a huge, roiling gut punch of a project, and one where I fluctuated how often I would revisit it throughout the year, but again, I kept coming back, and that earns it this spot. Number 11. Okay, look, at this point, she just keeps getting better. How?
You say you're dancing in the deep end, but to me it looks like drowning. All this talk, the same thing.
Anna Meredith's Varmints was one of the most brilliant electronic albums of the 2010s, and how it flipped a lot of the compositional structure on its heads with masterful syncopation and titanic crescendos. And FIBS might even be better, because now she's embracing her pop side with understated brilliance, and she's got the Technicolor chops to deliver in spades. To me, this project places Anna Meredith in the same tier and territory as artists like Imogen Heap or Robin, but even more eccentric and challenging in the composition. And yet the fact she can still make these songs catchy and heartfelt despite all that, it's a marvel to behold. But what I find so thrilling about FIBS, beyond the fact that it improves on production and writing and delivery in nearly every way, is that there is a focus on the little restraints we place on ourselves, why we hold ourselves back, the lies we tell ourselves, and yet by the end of the project, you can tell that Anna Meredith is willing to take that tentative step, cut herself free, and I can only imagine what's going to come forth from there. Number 10. Of all the albums on this list, this is the one I did not expect to like as much as I did. Not that it grew on me, but more because I was familiar with this guy before, and the tones that he delivered that worked for me before were different than what we got here. Guess it might have just been a failure to communicate, but I'm glad this album mended that connection.
And you can cop it on Quasars, you can stream it on Stars, you can hear it on Neptune, you can feel it on Mars. Far out, far out.
This album and Homeboy Sandman are not getting the acclaim nor the attention that they deserve, and that bothers me. Most because a lot of people have doubled down on Homeboy Sandman's offbeat observations and have framed this as just being another album about being a great rapper, kind of inwardly focused, which is a painfully short-sighted observation, when the album is really about exploring that failure to understand and communicate, both from his perspective and the audience. It's a fascinating dichotomy between showing real nuggets of insight and wit, and all the people who actually will get it, and anyone who works as a writer trying to balance out populism with the truth of your words. You'll feel this album on a pretty intimate level, but it's also not really confrontational about it either. More kind of bemused, isolated, occasionally lonely observations surrounding truth and perception that finds the greatest joys in connection, with production texture that might put off some of those who expect immediacy, but becomes incredibly inviting if you're willing to engage with it. It's not dusty because it's impenetrable old head rap, people. It's dusty because you don't engage with it enough. But you're going to be endlessly rewarded when you do. Number 9. Yes, I know, another year, not a lot of metal on the list. I wanted there to be. Both Tomb Mold and Spirits Adrift was really damn close, but I had to be honest with myself and focus on the projects that really resonated with me. And with that in mind, might as well highlight the album where the appeal is just pure emotional resonance. So, I I saw Saor live this year with Wayfarer and Paths of Roros, and it might have been among my favorite shows of 2019. Because not only did they deliver that sort of thunderous, soaring power live, the melodic richness translates as well, a blend of powerfully organic Celtic folk and black metal that shouldn't really work as well as it does, but connects all the same. And no, it's not really better than Guardians, and the ending's a little bit too low-key, and I do think the band will have to evolve their sound a little bit for the next project, but between the impressive, really groove-heavy production, the underrated environmentalist streak in the songwriting, damn near conservationalist, and some of the most stirring melody you will hear in metal, yeah, Saor for me is damn near one of a kind. And even if you find them a little hard to take seriously, which I get, for me, they'll at least always pretty much have a lock on this list. And I can't wait to hear more. Number 8. And while we're on the topic of soaring, powerfully organic music that I'm stunned worked as well as it did.
Don't say you're gonna save me, save me, save me. Don't say you're gonna save me, save me, save me.
I've already talked at length about how awed I was at finding Sundays pretty much by chance, with a debut album that's among the best of this year, but the truth is that the indie folk that this band delivers, it's not all that unconventional. Warm acoustics, powerful grooves, one of the better falsettos I've heard in a long time, a beautiful command of atmosphere, real hooks, and lyrics that can feel love-struck, but also forward-thinking and introspective, not intrusive. Hell, there's plenty of acts who have known this approach, but Sundays landed so powerfully on their first try, it's legit astounding. And while I will not claim any credit for breaking this band to any larger audience, finding and reviewing them, it was one of the most rewarding experiences I had as a music critic all damn year. And if that doesn't earn a spot on this list, hell, I don't know what does. Number 7. So Marianas Trench might have been the most obvious pick for this list coming from me, but this is probably the close second. And yet it's been one that's been overlooked by way too many, and yet deserves a lot more attention. Let's correct that, shall we?
They said it couldn't be done, we done it, we did. And fuck it from the top of our lung, and we were patient, no more waiting, cause our moment has come. Mission statement like, remember, this is supposed to be fun. What does that even mean?
We got the opening salvo from Sage Francis and B. Dolan as epic Beardmen last year, and while I'm still a little on the fence whether or not this hits as powerfully as the best songs from the Season 1 EP did, what we got instead was an album that showed a lot of impressive layers in its framing and construction beyond just the sheer banger appeal, which of course it has. Beyond the fact that we got two underground hip-hop heavyweights that can balance out their introspective darkness with a ton of humor, colorful production, and an abundance of quotable lines, what made this was supposed to be fun so potent for me was really living up to its title. For as much as you want to just to enjoy the character portraits and the tangled misadventures, there's always just enough detail and subtext in the framing that demands closer attention, where human and systemic failings mean that it's always a little bit more complicated than you might think. And you gotta engage with that. And the fact that the duo still make the album kind of fun, and despite their own assertions, it's a testament to veteran talent. One of the most slept on albums of this year, absolutely worth a lot more consideration. Because it really is fun. Number 6. So I listened to a lot of R&B this year. Didn't always cover it, but this was the year I heard more in this genre than I think I ever have, both past and present. And I finally found a sound that really clicked for me. Ingenious in the simple trick of its formula, but remarkable all the same.
Alright, I'll make it up tonight. I wanna do all the things that you like, provided you give me time, I'm saying.
So Emotional Orange has put out 2 EPs this year, and I'm specifically only including the first one on this list. The second has the best song from the duo, but the first is more polished and focused and has the strongest internal arc. But what stuns me is that this duo has such a deceptively simple framework, a mixed gender duo playing off each other for tempestuous but layered, organic but slinky R&B duets. What shocks me is that there aren't more acts that are mining this territory. There's so much that could be done. And what irks me is that Emotional Orange's relative anonymity has led to some to downplay this framework, completely ignoring the nuance on display and the broad swaths of potential they're only beginning to tap in earnest, but they really brought to the forefront here. Yeah, the second EP felt a little bit scattered and didn't quite hit with the same impact, but for a duo to leave this much of an impact this early, yeah, you're gonna be hearing more from these two sooner rather than later, because the possibilities are damn near endless, and this itself, something special. Number 5. So, if we're looking at the material that land on this list, a lot of texture, visceral subject matter, unflinching but complicated framing, and let's not forget, enough understanding of the past to leverage it into the present. And I don't know if there's a single artist who delivered such a potent force in country on his debut than Ian Noe.
On down between the country, where dear lay along the road.
What I find so striking about Ian Noe is that aside from his retro-leaning production courtesy of Dave Cobb, who actually improved on this project, and his slightly more nasal vocal delivery, this is an album that can feel decidedly modern, or at least of multiple times. Sure, the Outlaw stories might feel a little older, but there's a shaky, hard-bitten relevance in the language that keeps them feeling fresh and potent. And that's where he steps into the even grimmer stories grounded in the decaying Appalachia, with a sort of bloody detail that even a lot of classic outlaw country didn't care to paint so vividly. I've said before that some of the best country albums have a body count, and Ian Noe delivers, but the fact they don't make you care about every flawed or breaking human who dies along the way is what gives Between the Country a lot of impact. Again, it might not be the easiest music to grapple with, and certain songs will definitely make you question some of your own ideals. Meth Head springs to mind, but when it's this well composed, tuneful, and really quite magnetic with its charisma, you'll fall between those cracks. Might wind up loving it all the same. Number 4. So one observation I can see some of y'all making is that there doesn't seem to be a lot of fun albums on this list, or even if there is, they've got some sort of dark underbelly or complicating factor that doesn't make them easy to process. Which is true, for the record. I didn't exactly have a fun year. And yet, even though I'd say this album falls into a similar category, if you want the most fun that I had with rock music in 2019, it was this.
Isn't it easy when the world's got nothing against you? Isn't it harder when it seems like nobody cares?
Okay, let's get real. Did anyone see this coming? Did anyone expect a progressive rock band called Moron Police to put out some of those vibrant, tuneful, and catchy music of 2019 in the broadest sonic palette and their strongest hooks? And even then, they still managed to load in a pretty striking and nuanced anti-war message that didn't pull any punches and showed a lot more depth than I know they've gotten credit, as well as making a song that might as well be a love letter to puppies, and even that has some hidden depth. There's a strident confidence in being this just goddamn ridiculous and actually still owning all of it and bringing more nuance to it that I just have to respect coming from Moron Police, punching way above their weight class in some of the most idiosyncratic but genuinely likable progressive rock I've heard in years, providing all the more proof that when prog actually has hooks and well-executed transitions, it can be just as wonderful, even to this day. Again, this is another project I don't think anyone outside of a very specific bubble online that people heard, but it deserves so much more attention, and I can't wait to hear more. Number 3. Of all the albums on my list, this is the one that I probably feel got most alignment with mainstream critics, which is not surprising given the ambition and its themes and its marketing, but on some level I feel it's not been explored or praised enough, or brought with the level of insight into the depth I'd argue that this band deserves. Sure, there's a lot of audacity with a group like them, but you have to be able to back that up. So let me articulate their case.
I was a high woman and a mother from my youth. For my children, I did what I had to do.
To some, it might appear that the high women won people over on pedigree alone. And yeah, I won't lie, that's what got me in the door. Because getting Brandi Carlile, Natalie Hemby, Amanda Shires, and even Maren Morris together with Dave Cobb's production and a wealth of co-writers, it's setting things up for success. But what gripped me the most is the fact that this group, that they got all the praise for being feminist in country, they actually followed through with it and produced some really nuanced, compelling, and genuinely striking songs that embodied all of it. And of course, the title track is the shining example, but what I like so much is how every woman's character on this album is so unique and well defined with respect to their own careers and each other, showing off so many shades of a woman's experience that attained a universality that didn't need the male gaze, but also didn't disparage it. It shows that everyone is welcome at that crowded table, but it ensures they've got a seat there here. The writing's fantastic, the performances are among every woman's best, especially Maren Morris. The dimensionality and framing is as inviting as all hell, and whenever Amanda Shires plays the fiddle, it's goddamn beautiful. I don't know if this is just a one-off collaboration or they're gonna push this further, but man, I'd love to hear more from everyone here. And if there's a country album that's got even some crossover appeal and that's deserving all the acclaim it's getting, it's this one. Check it out. Number 2. Now on the flip side, I'm not surprised at all mainstream critics didn't get on board with this. Hell, I doubt the majority of them even heard it, because while the Highwomen want to be accessible, this group knows that on subject matter and presentation, they probably will never be. So why not just slim it down and deliver the best hip-hop album of 2019?
Where you at? Where you at? Where you at? If it ain't moving us, then it need to fall back. Plus smarts, plus heart, what you call that? Pinpoint aim, when I flame, you get all that. Where you at?
Oh look, there he goes. Mark Grundon put another album from the Doomtree Collective on his best list. Big surprise there. And my response is, yeah. Because in terms of forward-thinking experimental production that doesn't skimp on the hooks, a lot of real charisma from both frontmen with their best level flows in years, and a sort of inflammatory politics that goes far left of liberal but grounds it in very human reality, Shredder's delivered more than I ever expected to hear from them in 2019. Insanely quotable but never just sloganeering, politics that nails the precision, the populism, and the raw power, and even if I didn't already align with the politics, the presentation is so hard-edged, challenging, experimental, that I'm inclined to praise it anyway. And yes, it sucks that the mainstream outlets won't even come close to covering this sort of material because it's way too charged with the sort of forward-thinking attitudes that has no kind words for their wealthy backers, but I don't have those. I got y'all on Patreon, thank you all so much, and enough of a platform where I'm gonna give Shredders' great hits all the acclaim it rightly deserves, because a tight set of bangers this hot, they deserve exposure. Make sure you hear it. And finally, number 1. At the end of the day, I question a lot whether or not this album would be my top pick. It was a horse race between my top 3, and it did go down to the wire by the end. And yet, if there was an album that might just have as many bleak, messy moments that I praised all year, it's a note where hope is found in earnest, with a sort of unmistakable talent to back it up, and thus...
I sing traveling mercies, my lover, my friends. Traveling mercies till I see you again.
At this point, what more can I add about Emily Scott Robinson and Traveling Mercies? It seems like as the year progressed, more people seem to be getting on board with her sound, and she's received some acclaim from critics that are in the know, which is genuinely thrilling, even outside some of the indie country set. And yet for me, I hear so much talent and promise from Emily Scott Robinson, it's kind of hard to know where to begin. Yeah, I'll go on forever about her songwriting and her beautiful voice, a phenomenal command of atmosphere, and how varied and colorful Traveling Mercies is, but there's so much subtlety in crafting the mix, spanning from spare dream country to more traditional leaning structures, to songs that feel as windswept and soaring as some of the stories she tells. And you know, I don't even want to make the comparison to Casey Musgraves anymore, because despite some similarities to her earliest work and some parallels in the vocal timbre and even some of the subject matter, for me, Emily Scott Robinson, she's now in a category all by herself, and she deserves all the more attention and acclaim for it. This is my best album of 2019 at the mid-year, and despite some real late-round competition, it still is. You have excuses to have not heard this, folks, because I know this is a project for those who know that they'll cherish in the 2020s ahead, and I genuinely can't wait to hear more. Make the time, check this out, best album of this year. But hey, what were your picks? Maybe leave your list down there below, happy to hear all from them. I'm fairly certain I'll know what will be on a bunch of them, but I'm always curious. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. Hey, if you want to like and subscribe, I'd be grateful for that too. And you want to see other year-end lists, other videos, maybe even hop on the Patreon for 2020 going forward, links in the card right over there. See you all next year, but until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.